Right, so today we're going to be doing what would have been your last practical assessment for your B test, and we're going to be doing a Fruit Bavarois, classic Fruit Bavarois, which we have discussed as well before, with a fruit coulis, a berry coulis, and some Chantilly Cream. So the Bavarois basically is a mousse that is set with gelatine, using a Creme and Glaze base, which is a custard, the fruit puree folded through it, and some whipped cream to make it nice and light. We're going to set it in these moulds here, which we have lined the bottom tightly with cling film so the mixture doesn't come out, and that is on a lined tray with baking paper. Once the mousse is made, we'll put these into the ring moulds. I'm going to show you in a minute. Put them in the blast chiller till they're completely set before we try and attempt to take them out of the moulds, which I'll show you later. In this pan, I have got about 400 grams of So we've got about 400 grams of mixed berries in here, just frozen berries because they're perfect for purees. I've not put any sugar in this because half of this is going to be going into the mousses, half of it I will add sugar to later to make my coulis. I can check the sweetness of the berries later, and it depends if they're frozen, if they're in season, X, Y, Z. So I've just got a cartouche on top, and that's to stop them burning and just for them to stew down. I'm just going to let them carry on bubbling away for a little bit. And then once they're nice and soft and stewed down, I'm going to blend them in the food processor, and we're going to pass that through a chinois or a conical strainer, just to make sure there's no seeds in there, because there's nothing worse than purees and getting the seeds in your teeth when you're eating your mousse. So for the Bavarois, for the actual Bavarois base, we've got 2 egg yolks, I've got 50 grams of caster sugar, I've got 180 mils of milk, 3 leaves of leaf gelatine, which was soaked in some cold water to soften them up, which you always have to do. And then we've got 250 mils of cream, which is going to be semi-whipped. So just in a minute, once these berries have stewed down, I'm going to get these blended, and then I will start my Bavarois mixture as well while this is cooling down. Go. So this is the blended puree. It's nice and thick, not too liquidy, and then we're going to push this through this sieve to make it nice and smooth. In total, we need 200 grams for the Bavarois itself. Obviously it wants to be nice and flavoursome of the berries. That's the whole point of it. Now you can use strawberries, raspberries, whatever you want really. Ideally something that's in season, but obviously at this minute in time there isn't anything. That's why we're using the frozen berries, a bit more sustainable. Get it all back out of there, best we can. And I'm going to use a ladle, and I'm just going to push that through the sieve. Now remember, we need 200 grams for the mousse, and the remainder will be saved for the coulis, which is part of the assessment for the garnish. Right, so next part, we've done our coulis, nice and smooth. I've just got that over some ice cold water to cool it down. I've reserved a little bit in a squeezy bottle, which I've sweetened up for the puree for the plate. This is the puree that's going in the mousse, so I've not added any sugar to that. So now we're going to do our creme and glaze. Now this is a bit where most people go wrong, because the hardest part about it is stopping the eggs from scrambling. So what we need to do is bring it to a boil without it burning, and then when we come to thicken it with our egg yolk, we need to be really careful that it doesn't scramble the egg. So, I have a bowl here, and in this bowl I've got my egg yolks, 2 egg yolks, 50 grams of sugar. Now, what a lot of people do is, they stick their egg yolks on top of the sugar, and then they wait till that boils, and when they come back, what happens is the sugar starts to cook the outside of the egg yolk, and it kind of scalds the outside, and what happens is if you don't mix it together and you leave it, you'll end up with like flecks of yellow yolk that's slightly cooked through your creme and glaze mixture. So what you need to do is make sure you just whisk it together till it's all fully incorporated. It doesn't matter if you do about 5 minutes before that boils, but whatever you do, don't leave your egg yolks just sat on top of the sugar, because you can't get those flecks of orange back out your mousse. Just make sure you give it a good mix like that. You're not beating it or incorporating any air as such, we're just mixing it together. So once this milk comes to the boil, you could add a bit of vanilla at this stage if you really wanted to, but we're not going to do today. I'm going to bring this milk to boil, and then I'm going to be adding it to my egg yolks and sugar mixture in 2 stages. So this milk's now come to boil. Turn that heat off, and I'm just going to add my milk to the yolks and sugar whilst stirring. That's the important part. Make sure you keep stirring it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to be returning this back to a pan. Now if your pan's not burned, you can just use the same pan. If it has started to burn on the bottom, then I would suggest using a clean pan. I'm just going to get myself a wooden spoon. I'm going to put this into my clean pan. Make sure you get it all out because you've only got 2 egg yolks, so it's really important that you get every little scrap out. And now I'm going to gently cook this out so it thickens. And it's going to coat the back of the spoon, and that's what we're looking for. That's the sauce consistency. The creme and glaze is technically it's an English custard sauce. That's what it translates to, creme and glaze. So we're just going to keep cooking this out nice and gentle until the egg yolks start to coagulate, firm up. But what we don't want to do is scramble it. If you did scramble it, there's ways that you can kind of bring it back. I wouldn't really advise it, but you can, if you really had to, you can pass it through a liquidizer and then pass it through a sieve onto ice cold water, obviously into a bowl. And sometimes you can save it that way, but if it's gone too far, it will taste of egg. Just keep stirring that. And it won't be thick like your traditional custards that you get like in a bird's packet or whatever. It's going to be, it'll still be quite loose in texture, but it should have thickened more than it was before it went to the pan. So as you can see, I'm continuously stirring this, not stopping at all. And it shouldn't take long because that mixture was already boiling. And as you can see there that it has already started to thicken the mixture. So it's starting to coat that back of that spoon.
One thing I find as well, Chef, is that the bubbles tend to disappear when it's ready.
Yeah, the milk's gone onto it and it's kind of gone to a custard, and you can see now that is a lot thicker. That's a lot thicker than it was before, and if you run your finger down it, it's just starting to hold that shape. I wouldn't take it any further than that because that is hot and it will start to scramble. Now at this point I'm going to be adding my gelatine because obviously that needs to go into your liquid whilst it's hot. We've got 3 leaves of gelatine there. Make sure you get all that water out so we don't want to add any excess liquid. I'm just going to stir that in to my hot mixture, off the heat. And what you need to do is make sure all the gelatine's dissolved. You can put it through a sieve again if you like, but I can see that there's no gelatine in there. So that's absolutely fine. Now what I'm going to do is start to cool down this mixture because this glaze needs to be at the same temperature as my puree and my whipped cream. If this is hot and I add whipped cream to it, it could either split the cream or it'll denaturize it and it'll make it go really wet. And what we're looking for is a nice, fairly thick mousse texture before we put it in the moulds. There's a fine line between this being overset when we add it to the moulds and being underset. If it's underset and it's a liquid, you'll end up with a dense, heavy, rubbery sponge because there's no air left in it. And if it's overset, you'll end up with lines, like a ripple effect, where it's been put into the moulds. So I'm going to show you what we're looking for, but you can see it now that with the gelatine has already started to form a nice custard. So for the creme and glaze now, I've just put that into a bowl over some cold ice water. And like I said, we need that to cool down. What we don't want to do though is start the gelatine setting. If it sets, you're going to end up with lumps of gelatine inside the custard. And when we fold that together, we're not going to be able to do anything about it by then. So while I'm waiting for that, so I'm not just stood around twiddling my thumbs, I'm going to start whipping my cream. So in here I've got 250 ml of cream. And I'm just going to get that whisked together. And we want to what we're trying to achieve is semi-whipped cream. So not fully whipped, and not pouring cream. It's going to be semi-whipped, so somewhere in between the two. I'll show you what that looks like when it gets there. Right, so next stage then, obviously my cream is semi-whipped, and this is what I was talking about, so it kind of holds its shape. Not too thick, otherwise you end up with lumps through your mixture. Not too wet, like we said. My custard has cooled now. So I've taken that out of cold water. It's slightly thickened, but there's no lumps of gelatine. My puree is nice and cool as well, which I've got here ready. When you're making these Bavarois, it's all about preparation. You can't start messing about lining your moulds while this is setting. You've got to have everything ready at the same time. So that's why I did my moulds before. That's why I've got my cream whipped. And that's why I've got everything ready to go. Now I'm going to fold my unglaze base into here. Doesn't matter too much how you do it really. Some people have got a set ways to do it. I personally have never had an issue doing it either way. So all I'm going to do, I'm using a whisk as well to fold. Some people use a spoon. I find it better to use a whisk because it cuts through the cream better. Like so. Now I'm going to add the rest of my unglaze. Now if this was hot, that cream would turn to a really, really wet liquid, and we'd end up with a really runny, rubbery textured mousse. So I'm just going to make sure that's all in. And now I'm going to add my puree. This bit I'm just going to chuck in all together. Now a Bavarois is a set cream, so it's not going to be really, really light in texture like an aerated mousse, because apart from the whipped cream, we've not actually aerated anything. So it's got no egg whites or anything folded through this. So now, as you can see, it's got a nice pink colour. There. And you can see it's actually started to thicken again now, and that's because this mixture is really cold. It's, it'll be about 5 degrees now, by the time I've added my cold mixtures to that cream. And you can see it's all just starting to mix together. Now what's important is that you make sure it's all incorporated, because it's going to look all marbled otherwise. So just make sure it's all mixed in. And you can see it's all a nice pink colour. That's what we're looking for. So now it's ready to put into our moulds. So to do that, you can either do it with a spoon or a jug. What do you find easiest? I'm going to put some of the mixture into a jug, just to make it a little bit more easy, a bit more manageable. This is supposed to make four portions, but as I'm sure you're aware with recipes, a lot of the time it's not always the case. Sometimes makes a bit more. I've got 3 moulds which I'm going to fill up quite high, and you can see that the texture of that, the way it's pouring in, it's going to go nice and smooth. I'm not going to have to start pushing it into the mould. I'm just going to give it a quick tap in a minute. But it's not wet, so it's not going to run out the bottom of the moulds. It'll hold its shape. Just want a little bit more for this last one. And if you have got a bit of cream but it's not quite mixed in, just make sure it is mixed in before it goes into the mould. And you can see how much of a really nice colour those are. Nice vibrant pink colour, that's what we're looking for. And that'll have a nice berry flavour. Now some people as well, what you can do is you can also set a fruit puree on top, like a jelly top to these as well. We're not going to do that today, that is an option. And all I'm going to do now is tap the tray, just to get those to settle a little bit. Now if that mixture was really thick, then it wouldn't do that. You'd end up with lines all the way up. If it was too wet when I did that, all the mixture would come out the bottom of the mould. So as you can see, it's quite flat now. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to stick those into a boss chiller till they're completely set, probably a good 30 to 40 minutes. And then we'll come around to demoulding it in Chantilly Cream. Right, so I'm just going to show you a really quick way of doing a little chocolate garnish. These are called chocolate runouts or motifs, and this is the classic garnish for Bavarois and stuff like that, so I thought I'd go classic with this one. And all I've done, this is a good quality Belgian chocolate, and all I've done is microwaved it gently, 20 seconds at a time, just till it's just melted. I don't want to get it too hot because we want it to keep a bit of its temper, so that we'll be able to pick these up and put them on as our garnishes. So make sure it's all melted, but at the same time not too hot. The chocolate needs to not get too warm. This is just a quick way of tempering. I've got a little piping bag here, which I'm going to fill up with my chocolate. And then I've got a tray ready on my bench with some little bit of acetate paper, but baking paper is also fine. And then I'm going to close that up. Just twist up the end like that. I'm going to snip a tiny bit off the end now. I want these to be nice and delicate looking. I can check whether this is going to be, the nozzle's too big now. I think that's fine. Now you can do these really nice and neat and precise, or you can like that. A bit wiggly, that one. Like so. Or you can do it a bit more square, like that. Yeah. It's practice. I haven't done these for a long time, so they get better and better the more you do, as you can see. Like that. And if you're really, really rubbish at piping, a quick one you can do is just where you do that over the top of each other, and that's a really easy way, and actually it looks quite effective, probably a little bit more modern than the other ways I've just shown you anyway. So if you're not very good at piping, you can just do it like that. I'm going to drop those into the fridge to set. When they're completely set, I'll be able to lift those off with a palette knife, and that's going to be my garnish for my Bavarois. So this is the Chantilly Cream. Now all I've done here is whipped my cream. Don't try and whip the cream with your sugar in, because the sugar denaturizes the cream. So it'll mean it'll take longer to whip. Now it is you do this on taste really. Depends how sweet you want your cream to be, but you don't want to be too sweet, so we're adding some vanilla. We don't want it to overpower the cream. I'll provide you with a proper quantity and recipe for this, but this is just to give you a good idea. At the end of the day, if you were making this in industry, you'd just do it by taste. You wouldn't be using a recipe for Chantilly Cream, because there's only 3 ingredients in it. So now I'm going to carry on whipping that until it's nearly fully whipped, but not over whipped. And that is going to become part of the garnish to go with our Bavarois, which we're going to be plating up in the next minute or two. Right, so Bavarois fully set now. Important thing about this, never try and take these out of the moulds when they're not set. And you can tell just by pressing them, but it's not really hard, it's just nicely set. Now I'm just going to press that round edge with my finger, and I'm going to use the bottom for the top. That might sound a bit mad, but actually it's going to give us a nice smooth finish on the top. And all I'm going to do is run the blowtorch round the ring very gently, because I don't want to melt it. And you'll probably see it slide down the mould. And I'm doing it on the plate because I don't want to try and lift it after I've done that. And as you can see, it's perfectly set. That's the smooth sides we were talking about, no ripple effect. It's light, it's still got a nice wobble to it, just how I want it. Now I've got my coulis. It's up to you how you do this, but I'll show you how I would do it. It's a nice, you do a nice big amount on top because you want to kind of eat this all together. And I'm just going to do some nice random dots around the outside to make it look a bit more modern. Yep. And then I've got a few berries here as well. Just going to dot around the plate, which go with the mousse because these are the same berries that went into the coulis and into the mousse itself, which makes sense really. And then I've got some hot water. Now it's up to you, you can pipe this cream, but I'm going to use a hot spoon so it's a bit more modern. And I'm just going to do a nice quenelle in there, on top. And then I'm going to do another quenelle on the side as well. So. And then I've got my chocolate garnish or chocolate run out, whatever you want to call them. Everyone's got different names for them. I'm just going to put that on top. There you go. So that's our mixed berry Bavarois with a mixed berry coulis, some fruits on there as well for garnish, Chantilly Cream, chocolate garnish. As you can see, it's nice and smooth all the way through. There's no lumps of cream in there or anything like that.